and good afternoon in India to everyone. Welcome to this online pre-book launch discussion of the book, which is being prepared, Knowledge and Global Inequality, 1820 to the Present by Professor Devanathan. He's from Southern Center for Inequality Studies with University Johannesburg and a professor at Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, and the New School for Social Research, New York. Welcome, Professor Devanathan. And this online pre-book launch discussion is being organized by Southern Center for Inequality Studies with University Johannesburg in collaboration with Institute for Human Development, New Delhi. The moderator of this session is Professor K.P. Kannan. He's Honorary Fellow and former Director, Center for Development Studies, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. The discussants in this session are Professor Edward Webster. He's Distinguished Professor at SCIS Wits University, and Professor Rakesh Pasant. He's former Professor, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Without much further ado, may I request Professor Devanathan to start with the, or if Professor Kannan would give an introductory, remarks, I would request Professor Kannan to take the reins of this session in his hand and,
okay,
move forward to proceedings. Thank you.
As usual, as you say. No, I'm quite happy to be the moderator. So my job is basically to keep the time, but I don't think I have to do that work because all the people are so eminent that they know how much time they are expected to take. But I managed to read the manuscript which Professor Devanathan was kindly good enough to send me day before yesterday. I will not say much now because I should not preempt the discussion, but for me it was a fascinating reading. I was even excited at times. Having said that, may I request Professor Devanathan to make the presentation? Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Kannan. You said your age is catching up, but you can't be so old. You were my student, so you are not so old. Anyway, thanks to everybody for the Southern Center and IHT for organizing this discussion. This is a book which I have completed writing over here. And it's to be part of the UNU wider series, which they're doing with Cambridge University Press. It's something called Elements, which has a limit of 30,000 words. So I was happy with that limit because it makes it more possible for non-academics also to read it. The size of books, if I were to write, it would take long. It would not be read by so many. In fact, Wider asked me if I would like to write a whole book on this. I said, no, I'd rather write this monograph because that's better. More people are likely to read it. So what am I going to deal with? I'm going to talk about how knowledge will help us to explain the course of global inequality over a long period, 2 centuries. And what do we have to explain in this? We have to first explain what's known in economic history as the Great Divergence. What is this? That from 1820 to 1950, per capita incomes in Asia, mainly China and India, went down from 50 and 44% of Western Europe to 7% and 10% by 1950. So this is what's called the Great Divergence, but this is not only in Asia, it was also there in Africa, which went down from 35% in 1820 to 14% in 1950. Latin America suffered less, went down from 57.8 to 39.9. Now, in this period, manufacturing in India and China also reduced from 47% of world manufacturing to just 4%. Now, these figures are really taken from Deepak Nair's book, who bases his own figures on Angus Madison's work on the world economy. One should not take them as being exact numbers, figures, but they are really indicative of something that happened. That is what's called the Great Divergence. Then the second thing we need to explain is what happened afterwards, after the end of colonialism, which we take from 1970 to 2016. Here you find that there were differing growth rates in GDP across Latin America, which was very low. Africa was a bit higher at 1.5. East Asia, of course, is the star performer with 7% growth rate between 1970 to 2016. Southeast Asia with 4.5 and South Asia with 3.4. As a result of this, per capita GDP, which is what I'm mainly dealing with, went up in East Asia from 4% to 21% of that in the what we now call the global north. Southeast Asia also doubled its share from 4.5 to 9.4. South Asia remained, however, more or less the same at 4%. How do I explain this? I'm using the concept of knowledge. And here I'm looking at global inequality, not every kind of inequality, only the differences in per capita GDP as a measure of inequality. So I'm only looking at inter-country and not intra-country inequality. What is knowledge over here? Knowledge is knowledge of production, or what Kuznets call useful knowledge. Of course, there are other types of knowledge, spiritual, etc., but I'm not dealing with those over here. Along with Govind and Pallavi, I dealt with that when looking at gender inequality in indigenous societies and among the Indian Hindu caste system. Now, knowledge, I will only briefly mention that I look upon knowledge as what we may call a meta-resource. It is a resource that makes other things into resources. For instance, the crude oil under the oils of Arabia, under the sands of Arabia, are not a resource until we have a knowledge of how to extract it and how to use it. So that is what makes everything into a resource. So knowledge also produces what Marx called the forces of production. They don't just come from just by themselves. Human beings make them in interaction with nature, but it is knowledge that produces these forces of production. Now, what is the nature of knowledge as a good or a commodity? First of all, its consumption or use is non-rivalrous. If I give you a seminar today on this, my knowledge about global inequality, you may learn something, but I don't lose anything. So it is non-rivalrous. It's not like my drinking a glass of water, where if I drink this water, you can't drink it. So it is non-rivalrous. Or Eleanor Ostrom, also another Nobel Prize winner, she used the term non-subtractable. You can't subtract one person's knowledge from the other person. But it is very importantly also excludable. I can exclude somebody from using that knowledge, and that, in fact, is the key factor that I will look at over here. Excludable in the sense that, well, if I don't write it, you won't know it. I can keep a secret. Or nowadays we have intellectual property rights, which don't allow you to use certain kinds of knowledge. You may have the knowledge, but you can't use it because it is protected by intellectual property rights. Therefore, the important thing for this analysis, which is very different from the usual economic analysis, both classical and neoclassical economic analysis assume that knowledge is a public good and that it actually is available to everybody, but that's not true. And that exactly is the point that I would like to emphasize in discussing how knowledge can lead to inequality. So therefore, I have two kinds of value economic types. One is the enclosed or monopolized knowledge. And again, it can only be useful if it is what the term that was used by Thies, I think, if it can be used to appropriate something, that is to appropriate surplus profit. Earn is not the right word here. I should use it to say it is used to appropriate surplus profit, not to earn it. So, but the other knowledge is knowledge which is available in the commons or commoditized knowledge. Now, if you divide up the world or any place, even a household, for instance, into knowledge in the commons and monopolized knowledge, there is a division of labor. So somebody has one kind of knowledge, another person has another kind of knowledge. So that is a division of knowledge, which is also a division of labor. In the capitalist economy, we differentiate it on what is the kind of division, what is the income it can appropriate, what can it get. If there's a monopoly, it get power in the product market. It can secure higher prices of products. For instance, if it's a Nike shoe, it can charge a higher price than, say, a run-of-the-mill commoditized or a non-branded shoe. It'll get much more than that. An Apple computer charges a premium over, say, an HP or Dell computer. So it is able to fix the prices higher than the costs of products. There is another concept related to monopoly, which is very not much used in economics, but this is really due to Joan Robinson, who first used it in 1933. As she said, if there is only one seller of a product, there can be only one buyer of the inputs that go into that product. Therefore, she called that, with the help of a classical scholar who coined this term for her, monopsony, where there is just one buyer of an input, or there are just a few buyers of an inputs, and therefore they have power in the market and they can lower the prices of inputs. So we have two situations here. On the one side, you have a monopoly, which can increase the prices of products. And on the other side, you have a monopsony, which can lower the prices of inputs. So these are the main concepts. How now will I use them to explain the development in these 2 centuries? I use the term of adverse specialization. Okay, as I said, there is a division of labor, which is a division of knowledge. Of course, knowledge doesn't work by itself. It works with a development policy. The development policy in the colonial period was that of free trade, supported by Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, which said that you should produce that in which you have a comparative advantage. Then there is a specialization. So therefore, in Ricardo's example, Portugal was to produce grapes or agriculture, while England would produce cloth. But the point is, this is not an equal specialization, because manufacture has dynamic learning effects. As Arrow put it, there is a learning by doing. But as Sanjay Lal put it, there is another development of technological capabilities. So, which gives you returns to scale effect. You get higher returns to scale. You don't get that with agriculture. So therefore, that's why I call this an adverse specialization. It's not just any kind of specialization where both sides are equal. No, both sides are not equal. The returns are not equal. The development potential is not equal. Therefore, we've had in this long history of 200 years, 2 kinds of adverse specialization. The first is in agriculture versus manufacture, and the second of what we call headquarter versus supplier firms. So I'll briefly summarize this, which I will then explain in more detail. So the colonial period is a period of the first adverse specialization, where the North specializes in the knowledge of higher productivity sector, which is manufacture, and the South specializes in the knowledge of the lower productivity sector, which is primary products. Now we have then in the post-colonial period, what I'm calling here the second globalization, linked to not just production of commodities divided among different countries, but what is now called a splintering of production, a global value chain. So an Apple computer is not produced in just one country. If you look at the back of your Apple, it says designed in California, not even USA, assembled in China. So it has 2 places. One is, therefore, Apple is in the business of design and branding, and it specializes, the North specializes in the knowledge of higher value capturing tasks, while the South specializes in the knowledge of the lower value capturing tasks. These are the 2 different, and there's also in this a distinction between, which will make, which becomes very important now, between the creation of knowledge or the creation of new products and the use of that knowledge by using machinery. So now I come to, okay, what is the historical thing, facts we're looking at? The first is the Great Divergence from 1800 to 1950. We can date it one way or the other, but really it's a period of 1.5 centuries, which is the colonial period. If you go into the period before the Industrial Revolution, India and China actually dominated world trade and manufactures. There's a book by Janet Abulugo, which is called Before European Hegemony, where she brings out all these points. So cotton fabrics from India silk from and porcelain from China. These were the main manufactured goods that were traded in the world. Europe really had nothing much to offer except furs and leather. They had nothing much of any kind of manufactured goods. That's why when you see Europe started trading with Asia, they had to go and get gold or silver from somewhere else, because they had nothing to offer other than precious metals. So how does this change to one where Asia became an exporter of raw materials, and that also of cotton? By the way, England never produced cotton. It still doesn't produce cotton, but it was the main center of cotton manufacture. So how did Europe become the center of manufactures of the global north? First, Britain learned from India the art of cotton manufacture. They didn't know it. It is called the Indian apprenticeship in the economic history. They really came and they learned it. Second, when they started manufacturing cotton without a factory system, this is before factories were set up. First, they protected their manufacture from the superior Indian competition by having tariffs. And once they had mechanized the system, then they set up a system of free trade, because their cheaper imports could destroy the handicraft production in India. So therefore, there was this European monopoly. Along with this, they set up a monopoly of this advanced technological knowledge. India did not have a system of intellectual property rights, but even in the Elizabethan period in 1400, they began having monopoly rights over certain kinds of production. They even gave one producer the right to make playing cards. Nobody else could make playing cards except that one monopolist who had that right. Anyway, now along with these rights, they had what we call techno-nationalist policies, what Ha Jun Chang, the Korean economist, calls kicking away the ladder. Actually, this is a phrase from, I think, Alexander Hamilton that he uses, that when that England, having become an industrialized country, they were kicking away the ladder to prevent others coming up. So this is a very way of stopping the spread of knowledge. They learned it from India, but then they stopped allowing it to spread. They blocked the export of machinery. Even skilled artisans were not allowed to migrate. So this was it was not just in one particular sector, cotton, but it really was what is called a change in the techno-economic paradigm. So the advanced technology was used across all manufacturing products. It's what Schumpeter called gales of creative destruction. So step by step, all manufacturers were returned. And as I mentioned earlier, so there were increasing returns to scale, but Britain was not a large market. It was a very small market of its own. Unlike Mughal India or China, it was a small market. Therefore, it needed an external market. That's why that became the reason for colonies. This was first pointed out by Rosa Luxemburg, who said, look, the surplus production, where does it go? It has to go somewhere. They don't have enough of a market on their own. Along with that, they also needed production of raw materials. Therefore, you get this adverse specialization. As I pointed out, that there is monopoly, there are few buyers and many sellers. This is the base of those who are familiar with the economic analysis would know. The thesis put forward by Prebisch and Singer immediately after the Second World War, that look, you can't just keep on exporting agricultural products. You're not going to get much. The prices will in fact fall, and the prices kept falling. Between 1900 and 1986, the prices of non-fuel commodities fell by 0.6% per year. Over 100 years, it amounts to a lot, 0.6% per year if your income keeps falling. Therefore, what happened is the rates of growth in the North, with their specialization in manufacture, were higher than in the South, leading to this great divergence. This was also called by the Indian economist Omyo Bakchi. He called it the imperially imposed division of labor, what I'm here calling adverse specialization. So that is the first phase that we have gone through. The first phase where knowledge enclosed by the North was not allowed to be spread in the South and led to a specialization of the South in agriculture and raw materials and the North in manufacture. Now, this has had an effect over a very long period. In fact, after I wrote this manuscript, I came across a paper by Isabella Weber and others, which is very interesting because they point out that what you exported in 1900 will tell you what is your rank in per capita GDP in 2000. So that effect on the economy is not just what you export, but the point is that there is, the export sector is usually your most advanced sector. And so it tells you something about the technological complexity of an economy. Of course, this effect is now weakening in the 21st century, and which I'll come to later. So, and this is actually now, as Malinovich points out, look, actually global inequality is falling faster now than the rate at which it increased. But this reduction is not geographically even. So we have to go, what is the diversity and how does knowledge explain the diversity? In 1950, Bangladesh, China, Ghana, India, and South Korea were all at about the same per capita income level. Bangladesh is now a lower middle income country with a per capita income actually higher than India, which many Indians don't like to acknowledge. Ghana and India are both also lower middle income countries. China is what's called an upper middle income country, and South Korea is actually a high income country. So how did this happen? And what are the problems in this kind of transition that we have seen? So I'll just briefly go again through the structure of the economy, reiterating that now we have, in a formalized sense, what we call intellectual monopoly capitalism. This is part of the WTO requirements. If you want to be a member of the WTO, you have to have a law which allows for the intellectual property rights in the same manner as it is in other countries of the world. A little bit of leeway was given for lower income countries, but not much. But as I said again, these monopolies are also monopsonies. So as a result of intellectual monopoly capital, I'll just point out, then now the largest companies in the world are now all what we call tech companies, but which are actually intellectual monopolies, whether it is Amazon or Google, they all are based on a monopoly. There's a new kid on the block. If you're familiar with the chip manufacturer, there's a company called NVIDIA, which makes what used to be chips used for gaming. But now those gaming chips are the center of artificial intelligence, because they can do what's called parallel processing. They don't do just one calculation at a time. They can do many calculations at a time. So therefore, that company has to become one of the largest 10 companies from having been, nobody heard about it 5 years ago. And today, in 1 year, it has become one of the largest. Now, the monopolies are also monopsonies. As I pointed out, this is a global monopsony now. The term was first used by Ashok Kumar in a book which he titled also Global Monopoly. And then around that time, I also used it along with some others. And we started using the term global monopsony. So what happens as a result of this monopsony is that the lead firms are able to buy the inputs into their production at below the cost of production. Labor is not at its cost of production. And this idea that labor is bought by a firm below its cost of production is something I learned from the analysis of the South African apartheid economy. Harold Volpe had come up with this analysis of the articulation of modes of production, where he pointed out that the homelands provide for the low wages that are paid in the mining and other advanced sectors. So and also there is there's a reduction in that is paid for environmental services. So therefore, you see that wherever there is a garment center, whether it is Tirupur or Dhaka or anywhere else, the environment is completely destroyed around it. The rivers are completely turned black. So this we have called reverse subsidies, meaning they are subsidies extracted from the poorest, from the women who work in the garment factories, from the environment, they don't go to the manufacturers because of monopsony. They're actually captured by the lead firms. So what is the difference between the two is that the lead firms, that's a repetition, is that the lead firms they design the brand, but not the manufacture. As I mentioned, the Apple MacBook is not made in California, it's assembled in China. Or one of the Prada, the family members said, made in Italy, who cares? You don't look to see whether it's made in Italy. You look to see, is it a Prada brand or is it a Nike brand? You don't look for where it is made. Only some people look around. I look every time. I say, okay, where did this garment come from? Where did that shoe come from? That's only because I'm interested in global value chain. But if you're buying a product, you don't look to see, is it made in Italy? You look to see, is it Gucci or Prada or whatever. Now, the gross profits of these headquarter firms, as they are called, is around 40% to 60%. This is their profit margins. When this was mentioned to a garment supplier in India, he was amazed. He said, and we get so little, and they get 40 to 60% of profit. Now, the supplier firms, their profits are around 10% in garments and shoes, 5% in electronics. Foxconn only gets 5%, but their volume is huge. But the Indian IT service companies, Infosys and Tata's, TCS, because they have built their own brand, they have a reputational brand, and they are able to charge 25 to 30%. In fact, they will not accept a contract with a margin less than 25%, because they're able to do it. They're able to, others can't do it, only they can do it. Now, this difference is not only in margins, but also in per capita productivity. You are employing higher skilled workers, while garment manufacture has low skilled workers, design has high skilled workers. Apple design has high skilled workers, while the manufacturer has, you don't even have to be to assemble an Apple product, you don't even have to be high school pass. So therefore, this is something that I'm doing along with some of my colleagues whom I've listed over here, Rahul from India, Lee from Korea, Zhu from China, and Johnston from the USA. We're trying to put together cross-country data. And this is interesting. This tells you per capita output as a percentage of that in the USA. We're taking that as a benchmark. So if we have taken the period 1995 to 2015, in fact, 2020, and if you see, so in garments, the per capita output in China was only 4.5. It has gone up to 84.2 because they built their own brands. In shoes, it has gone up from 5 to 46. Again, they built their own brands and are doing what we call full package supply. In automobiles, again, it's gone up from 3.9 to 14.9. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, IT services. India, you will see, is not doing so well, except in IT services, where its proportion of the US value is 52% in 2015. But look at South Korea. In garments, it has gone up from 39% of US productivity in 95 to 205% in 2015. How did it do that? My colleague Junku Lee says what happened is that after the Asian financial crisis of 98, 99, they stopped producing low value labor intensive products. They outsourced them to Cambodia, to Vietnam and other countries or China, and they only did the top end of it. Therefore, their value went up from 39 to 205. In electronics, we know what they have done. They were first they reverse engineered everything. And now you have Samsung and others as brands. Therefore, their productivity is 142% per worker, that of the USA. They also have a monopoly in some items, inputs, flat screens. Every flat screen in the world is made in Korea, whether it's in your mobile phone or in your laptop or wherever it is. So they have a monopoly in an input. If you have a monopoly in an input, you can counter the monopsony and get a higher price. So this is how it has changed. But the point is that it's not only the high profit rate, it's also the change in, there's a change in there's a difference in productivity. Now, how do we deal with this global unequal relationship? One way has been by countering monopsony. Okay, the most that is, producers get together and fix the price. Well, there's only been one successful counter to monopsony, and that is OPEC, because there are not so many places where you can get oil. It's not like coffee or tea, which can spread other places. But they therefore were able to fix the price and could get a higher share compared to what they got before that. Sometimes you can do some branding like specialty coffees, but there's not too much you can do. Monopsony is very difficult to cancel. Another way has been by countering monopoly, by developing your own technological knowledge. This is what going from the simple assembly, adding functions. You don't just cut, make, and trim a garment. You now take a design and turn it into a garment, what we call full package supply. So now more and more, say, Bangladesh firms don't just cut, make, and trim, they do the full package. So therefore, they're able to add to the amount that they are earning. They go from what Sanjay Lal called elementary technological capabilities, which are simply how to operate a machine, plus learning by doing, to developing intermediate technological capabilities, which involves research, and then going to advanced technological capabilities where you're now able to make new products yourself. So there is this vertically specialized, but an important part of it is what I put in the second thing, but what's called reverse engineering. Everybody learned through reverse engineering. If there hadn't been no reverse engineering, there have only been one industrial country in the world, and that was England. But everybody copied what they did, and therefore they also learned it. So now they grumble about this. They say, you're stealing our technology. But they stole it themselves when they became. The USA in the 19th century was known as a pirate nation because they stole everybody's technology and built it on their own and reverse engineered it. Japan is famous for reverse engineering. So some of the types of reverse engineering I've listed here, Samsung, they didn't make the smartphone. Apple made it, but they reverse engineered it and were able to do it on their own. Huawei has bought equipment from Siemens, from Cisco, etc., telecom equipment, and they built their own 5G equipment because they reverse engineered everything. Tata had a collaboration with Mercedes-Benz, and then they reverse engineered it and made their own car. But India, if you look, unfortunately, has a very low firm level R&D. This is something to be investigated. Why is firm level R&D so low in India? But one thing that India did very successfully reverse engineer is drugs and pharmaceuticals. Because before the WTO, India did not have product patents for drugs. It only had process patents. And therefore, they were able to reverse engineer everything that came out. They reverse engineered the AIDS drugs and became the pharmacy of the developing world. Now, I've just tried to systematize this into a simple 3x3. So a low assembly, an economy that mainly does assembly is a low knowledge area, a low knowledge intensity. It's mainly a low income country. An economy that goes towards full package supply, doing a lot of reverse engineering and technological upgrading, is a middle income country. While an economy that specializes in innovation, design, or high value services is the high income country. So this, in a way, is, well, it's a very simple way of putting it, but it's important. And it shows you the pathway that can be followed. Okay, I'll just, that's good. Now, but the question that I raise is it so simple? Is there just a linear progression from simple economy to full package to creation? No, there is a huge difference because, see, the lead firms may give you part of the knowledge of production because it will reduce their costs of manufacture. But they do not want to share the knowledge of product design because this is their core function, which they don't want to allow the Souths to come into, to stop. That's why, as Hajun Chang puts it, kicking away the ladder. They don't want you to climb that ladder. There is a big difference then between the creation of new knowledge and the use of the existing knowledge. This results in what I call a non-linearity in the process of development. You can go up to here, but the next step is very difficult. This results in what has been called the middle income trap. Many countries have reached middle income, but very few have gone beyond that. Only like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Costa Rica, later on Poland and a few others, but large numbers, particularly in Latin America, have not gone out of this middle income trap. And I say the reason is that there's a difference between using knowledge and creating knowledge. To be a high income country, you have to go into that creation of new knowledge, as you see Korea doing, and China now trying to do it by itself. Now, how do I just want to summarize this, that what is the indicator for knowledge creation? R&D as an expenditure of GDP. Look where India is, just 0.65. By the way, I looked up the 2022-23 figures. India is still at 0.65. It's not able to go beyond that. Brazil is a little higher. South Africa is also less than 1. But see where China is, 2.19, more than with a GDP that is 6 times India's. But Korea is at 4.8, and USA is at 2.8, and Japan at 3.2. So unless you're able to invest in R&D, you're not going to be able to move from being a user of knowledge to becoming a creator of knowledge. So there is some change in the world, and this is also reflected in the Global Innovation Index, which reflects the use of knowledge. Over here, China ranks 12 overall and 1 in the upper middle income countries. It has 40 overall, but first in the low middle income countries. Latin American countries do poorly. Only Mexico has increased its rank, and the very low and stagnant GII shows that the persistence of this middle income trap. You're not able to easily move from using to creating knowledge. I'll give you an example of the Indian pharmaceutical industry. We are experts at reverse engineering, copying. But after having joined the WTO and changed the laws, where we now have product patents, India has not developed a single new drug on its own. It has only reverse engineered. The first time it did something on its own was when it made the COVID vaccination, but that is and China also made it, I think South Africa. So they're just coming into it. So even 20 years is not such a long time in making that shift. Just to summarize again, the GII index, among the Latin American countries, among the highest are Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. In sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Botswana, I was surprised to see Botswana there, and Senegal. In Southeast and East Asia, it is Singapore, Korea, and China. In South and Central Asia, it is India, Iran, and Kazakhstan. These are the leaders in their regions. Now, we take income groups. In the upper middle income countries, China, Malaysia, Bulgaria. In the lower middle income countries, it is India, Vietnam, and Ukraine. I was surprised. I didn't know Ukraine was a lower middle income country. I thought it would definitely be higher middle income. But I suppose they mainly manufacture wheat. They're wheat growers. They're the breadbasket of the world. So they have been from the time of the Stone Age, after the Stone, from the Neolithic Revolution. Anyway, and among the LIC, the low income countries, Rwanda comes on top, followed by Madagascar and Togo. What I want you to note is that none of the Latin American countries are in the 5 which have made the headway in the last 5 years. Okay, now I'll leave this because there is a change. There is a change in the world order. New countries are coming up. There's a struggle over areas of influence, and there's a move to shift to what's called friend-shoring. But I will just conclude with this now. So there are 3 sources of growth for the South. One is to remain within the existing knowledge division, which will not take you very far. You will remain a low middle income country. You develop knowledge and add functions to carry out full package supply, which can get you into a middle income country. Or then you can develop your own monopolized knowledge to create headquarter firms that will be able to capture high profits and incomes in that way. Then, of course, that you will become part of the struggle for the global spheres of influence. As you can see now, China and even India and everybody else, even India is now touting itself as we are the next superpower. So everybody wants to, Turkey is doing that. Many other countries are also trying to push their way now that it is different. But I think I would like to just conclude that, look, we need to look at how do we manage knowledge? Can we change it so that we make not monopolize, but provide incentives for knowledge creation? One way is, as suggested by some, you can have compulsory licensing, where you must cover the risks. Not all R&D leads to something new. You have many failures before you can actually get something. So you need to cover the risks and to provide an incentive to create knowledge, but not to make monopolies. Thank you. And then maybe I took a little longer.